I'm just a sexy, normal person who's developed a healthy way to process my emotions, not to where I am focused only on being happy or I don't allow in the quote unquote negative emotions, but in a way where I can sit with however I'm feeling, recognize the root cause of the feeling, learn from it, and find a way to be grateful for it. I historically had a really hard time allowing myself to feel anything. I was always a bit like stagnant, generally content, but I was never like too overly excited, and I definitely was never angry or sad. And after my father died, I felt like this well of emotions suddenly was completely released, and I didn't know how to control it, and I didn't know who I was anymore. And it wasn't until I started doing yoga and meditating and getting into this more spiritual practice that I really was able to sit with and process emotions in a healthy and effective way. And I know a lot of people who have the exact opposite problem. Their emotions come on so strongly that they don't know what to do other than just be with the emotion. And the emotion ends up taking a kind of control over them. Like if they ignore the emotion or if they work through the emotion, that they're somehow lying to themselves or being inauthentic. In the end, it's only human to experience emotions. And throughout our lifetime, we're going to experience every emotion probably. And we're capable of doing that. We're built to do that. The trick is to acknowledge and to process the emotion in a healthy way, to let it add depth to our experience of life, to learn from it, to grow from it. So based on my personal experience, I want to share with you my 6 tips for how I process my emotions. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. I don't want to tell you how to feel, but hopefully this will provide some insight, some pathway to understand however you're feeling, and maybe some exercises or some thought experiments to get you to a place where you can process in your own unique way. So without further ado, these are my 6 tips to process your emotions. Tip number 1, ice cream. Tip number 1 is to acknowledge and accept however you're feeling. The first step in getting to where you want to go is to accept where you are. And it goes the same with our emotions. You know, when you see someone crying, especially a kid, the first thing we say is like, stop crying, be happy. There is a reason we feel sadness. There's a reason we feel anger. There's a reason we feel happiness. And none of it's bad. I hate the term negative emotions and positive emotions because every emotion has a purpose. And in that way, they're all positive, right? As long as we can actually take the time to sit and process and reflect on why we're feeling that specific way. I think for a lot of people, it's easy to feel a sense of guilt around specific feelings. We get down on ourselves, like, why am I feeling this way? I don't want to be sad. I want to be a happy person. But in the end, getting down on ourselves, that self-judgment is only going to make it worse and make it harder to process. Same with distracting ourselves. I'm the kind of person, I used to love distracting myself from feeling things. I would stay so busy that I didn't have time to process, and I would just rationalize, like, I don't need to be sad or angry about this now. I just need to focus on this and it will go away on its own. And for me, what ended up happening was a lot of those feelings would process and manifest themselves as physical ailments. I used to get the worst stomach aches every morning before work when I was in my old job. I would wake up and I would feel fine, and the second I would get in my car to drive to work, I just felt like my stomach was going to explode. Turns out I was unhappy and stressed out, and I wasn't processing that. So I was getting those stomach aches. I know for a lot of people it's headaches, skin rashes. If we're not processing effectively, of course it's gonna become illness. So first things first, step 1, just take a moment to be with ourselves and really allow ourselves to feel it and to say consciously, okay, here's where I'm at. I'm feeling sadness. That's great. What next? Step 2, to understand if the emotion is situational or if it's triggered from a past memory. Of course, things happen all the time in our daily lives that trigger emotions in us, right? Like someone says something mean, of course we're going to feel angry. If something sad happens, we're going to be sad. The issue comes in when something happens that actually the way we're feeling is because it brings back a memory. It's a trigger for us from our childhood, from an ex relationship, from a moment in our lives. And if we don't acknowledge that trigger, then we apply the emotion to the situation. And that's where we get into trouble, because then suddenly these situations happen over and over and over again because we're not actually addressing the root cause of the emotion. For example, I grew up with some serious abandonment issues. My parents divorced when I was young. My mom left when I was 6 or 7 years old. And I had a really hard time getting close with people because the second someone acted like I was being too much, or if I felt like someone had a small problem with me, my immediate thought was, this person's gonna leave me, and I would back away myself. Once I recognized where these issues were coming from, I realized that I needed to have a serious conversation with my mother, and I need to get to the heart of what these issues were for me. And so around the time I graduated from college, I literally had a sit-down conversation with my mom, and I brought up the fact that I was having these issues, and I saw how this was playing out in my relationships. And we were able to, in as much of a way as we could, find some kind of resolution for me. To get very real with you, when I explained my issues to my mother, she explained to me that no relationship is guaranteed to be forever. There will always be relationships that are temporary, that we have no control over whether or not someone comes or goes in our life, and that some relationships are meant to be for a moment and some are meant to be for a month or for a year. And ultimately, every relationship is equally as important, because every person that we meet is someone that we can learn from and learn more about ourselves from and have a life-changing experience with. And she told me that it was up to me to decide, is it worth it to have a relationship with someone knowing that that person could leave at any point, or is it better for me to not have any relationships at all? And in that moment, I realized two things. That number one, she's right. And number two, I kept expecting her to be this paradigmatic maternal figure in my life and nurture me and protect me. And hearing your own mother tell you that, you know, people can leave you at any time and that's just part of life is actually a really painful experience. But I was able to, in that moment, reset my expectations of what our relationship was, knowing her perspective, where she was coming from. And then I was able to grow a healthy new relationship with her based on the facts rather than based on my own expectations for the relationship. So I was able to resolve a lot of my own personal traumas through one conversation, and then I was able to grow and move into having more committed, healthier, long-term relationships with people. Step 3 is to recognize that you are not your emotions. You experience emotions. I talked about this a bit in my 10 tips to be happy video, but ultimately the idea that I am a sad person, I'm an angry person, I'm a happy person. If you in a moment change that behavior, if you suddenly stop being sad forever, you would still be you. One trick that I've picked up over the years is actually to think in third person. When we're finding ourselves completely immersed in an emotional experience and we're having a hard time breaking out of it, I'll literally say to myself, Daniel is experiencing sadness. When I got food poisoning and I was really sick, I said to myself, Daniel is getting to have the experience of pain right now. This is especially powerful for people who tend to be in their thoughts a lot, whose minds tend to work against them, people who have a lot of self-judgment. The idea of turning our thoughts and our emotions into a separate being that we're interacting with, that we're having an experience with, it's not about minimizing it. It's about acknowledging that as a human being, I am separate from this. Give this one a try, but in any case, just to acknowledge for yourself that if you're feeling a certain way, you don't like how you're feeling, that you get that sense of guilt, that sense of self-judgment about it. Just remember that that does not equal you. You are a whole, complete person I'll repeat to the camera, you are a whole, complete person. That emotion does not say anything about who you are. It's just something you're experiencing right now, and that is okay. Number 4, step 4, ask yourself what can be learned from this. I find that with anything in life, the second we take that time to reflect and learn from the experience, it suddenly shifts something for me from why did this happen to okay, this is helping me grow as a person. Coming out of the death of my father, I was able to take that grief and that sadness and turn it into all of this, right? I recognized that the way I was living didn't have a deep sense of meaning that I needed in my life, and that I have this knowledge and I have these experiences that I can share with the world, and I have a really good voice for TV. So it just made sense that I should be telling stories, that I should be helping people in whatever way I can. I did not have the greatest childhood in the world, but I realized that my independence, my critical thinking skills, a lot of the things that I really loved most about myself came from those experiences. The fact that my mom was gone, the fact that my dad had to work all the time, the fact that my sisters were best friends and didn't want to hang out with me, and I didn't really have any friends in school. I learned independence. I learned how to be on my own. Of course, I developed a whole slew of other issues in the process that I was able to work through over the years. But in the end, who I am now is because of those experiences. And coming to that point gives us a deep sense of liberation. Which brings me to number 5. To find gratitude in any of these experiences. There's an amazing book I read by Khalil Gibran called The Prophet. There's a really profound section on sadness, which is something like sadness is the chalice which holds our happiness. And the more sadness we're able to feel, the more happiness we're able to receive into our lives. Because sadness is simply something that we love being taken from us. So it's two sides of the same coin. For me, when my father passed, I wanted to feel sadness because it meant that I loved him in a deep, profound way. And in the moments where I didn't feel sad, in the moments where things felt normal, I felt guilty about it. I felt like something's not right. Every experience we have is adding depth to our experience of life, is fulfilling that mission in a way. Whatever that looks like for you, once we can learn and process a bit from these emotions, just take a moment to think about, is there any way in which I've grown, or I can take something positive from this? If this is something that feels really hard, or if this brought some kind of realization to you, please do share, because again, this is a community of people. We all have different experiences. Everyone has their own traumas. And the more we can talk about our traumas and the more we can talk about how we're processing, who knows who you'll be able to help out of this. Number 6 is to find a safe space to communicate your emotions. And there's a reason I made this the last step. For some people, it's really difficult to communicate emotions, and we tend to store it inside and lock it in, act like everything's fine. And for other people, it's really easy, but to the point where it can sometimes just be spreading emotions like word vomit all over anyone who will hear from you. And both of those can have some unhealthy side effects, because on one hand, you are isolated, you're disconnected from other people, you're creating a barrier between you and people who potentially want to give you love, want to give you support, and you're not allowing them to do that. And on the other hand, potentially you're bringing people into the drama with you. If you're the type of person who's constantly just radiating whatever emotion that you're feeling, it can become overwhelming for the people around you. So the trick is to do some of the work on your own, and at least to understand where the emotion is coming from. You know, what is the root cause of this emotion? What am I feeling right now? And then finding a safe space, finding people who won't judge you, finding people who, at least if they do offer advice, they ask you first. The more we can do that, the closer we actually become to people. If we can show vulnerability with people and we find a way for them to, in a healthy way, support us through these emotions, that becomes an intimate bonding experience. That is actually how we get closer to the people that we love. So it is an extremely important step when it's done in a healthy way. Emotions are an extremely sensitive topic, so hopefully my words were sensitive. It is not my intention to trigger anyone. It's not my intention to tell you how to live your life. But if we can have some of these tools to at least understand how it is that we're feeling, it can help us to move forward in whatever way we can in that moment. And I hope that someone out there is able to process some emotion and become the person that they want to be. So from Thailand, I'm Daniel Sherman, and this is How Is This Real Life? How is this real life?